Hello, Mr. C here in the wood shop again. I'd like to talk to you about circular saws today, but before I do that, I'd like to talk to you about the fact that I'm a woodworker, not a videographer. But the content that you will see here will let you go ahead and use circular saws safely inside the shop, okay? So let's just continue. I'd like to talk about the two different circular saws that we happen to have here in the shop. They're a little bit different. One's a track saw, one's a traditional circular saw. Okay, and I'd like to start with, this is a traditional circular saw that happens to have your base to it, happens to have your guard, and a rotating spring activated. So when you go ahead and cut your material, this is going to pull back, and as soon as you're done cutting the material, it's going to slide back and cover the blade, so that way you're safe, okay? Now, to adjust on this machine, to adjust the bed of this, or the plate, you loosen up this knob right here, and you can adjust the height of how much material or how much blade is exposed. Typically, when we set up the blade on either machine, what we want to do is set the blade going 1/8 of an inch more than the thickness of wood. Now, for instance, this piece of material that I'll be cutting for you in a little bit, it's 7/8 of an inch thick. This is going to be a sign that students are making for a little project, and it's 7/8 thick. So what we need to do is set our saw at 1 inch in thick in depth, okay? So with that being said, that's what we'll do to make sure that you only have it 1/8 of an inch more than the thickness of material, because that's all that's required, all right? Now, whenever you're using this type of machine, you want to always make sure that you're using both hands on the machine itself. Your front hand on this handle here, your back hand on the handle that has the trigger. Okay, the trigger's right here. We're going to rotate this down, back around this way, okay? Now, cord happens, not a big deal. I'm just going to wind this up for now, just to talk to you about this, okay? Now, you want to make sure, this is one of the most important things whenever you use a circular saw, is you would like to probably, if you can, have a guide to help you cut straight. Typically, the furniture, cabinet making, millworking industry, you want to be as accurate as you possibly can. And with that, you should be using a fixture, a jig, or a straight edge, something like that, to make sure that you can follow it to cut it perfectly straight. These machines were not designed to cut curves. Yes, I know people have done that before. It's just not recommended. These were designed to cut in straight lines, so that way you don't have kickbacks, okay? Another thing I need to address is this guard on this machine. A lot of people that work in the industry will pull this guard back, and what's called a shim is they'll shim the guard, so the blade is always exposed. This is an incredibly dangerous thing to do, so please do never attempt this. And whatever lie they tell you, the reason why they're doing it, it's just not worth it. All it's asking for is a trip to the hospital, and that's not what we want, okay? It's going to be my catchphrase. You're going to hear me say that's not what you want often, okay? So always make sure that your guard is working properly, which on this type of piece of equipment, it springs back once the blade is exposed. So essentially, once you cut material, it's going to pull this guard back some, and then once you're done cutting it, you push the material, the machine or the handheld tool through the cut, and it'll allow for that to slip back, okay? You always want to maintain a 4-inch margin for safety as far as where your hands are placed. If your hands are placed here, you will maintain a 4-inch margin for safety, so you never have to worry about your hands getting close to the blade, all right? So that's this typical style of circular saw that has been around for a long, long time, for decades, okay? Something that's relatively new to the industry is track saws. I'd say the last 8 years, something like that, they started coming out. And this happens to be a Festool track saw, okay? I like this piece of equipment. It's super accurate, cuts really, really, really well. We have a lot of the other Festools in class to allow for you to go ahead and end up with a finished product that's really, really nice. And they've manufactured these and made these to be very, very accurate, okay? Now, when you pull this out of the box, okay, we also have the dust collection. So it's kind of nice that you can hook up the dust collection here to the tube, and then once we connect our extension cord, or I'm sorry, our power, I'm just gonna plug this in, rotate this so that this locks the cord in. I'm not gonna plug this in just yet, okay? I wanna explain this though. If I plug this into the dust collector, and there's a way to set this up, where if you had plugged the tool, like whether it's the circular saw, router, or something like that, if you take this, plug this into the dust collector, and you take the dust collector and plug it into the power source, when you turn the machine on, it turns on the dust collector. When you turn off the machine, it turns off the dust collector. So it's kind of a nice little handy thing to keep the shop relatively clean. But back to the circular saw, okay? On this machine here, you happen to have a dial-in or a speed adjustment, because this is variable speed, okay? Whenever you want to tilt the head on this piece of equipment, there's a knob right here you can loosen up. There's one in the back, same exact spot. And then you can tilt the head of this if you wanted to cut at a 45-degree angle or a 22.5-degree angle if you chose to do that. Today we're just going to cut a 90, okay? So we're going to set this up so it's at 90 degrees. I can set very easily how far the blade will drop down by adjusting this. I just push this in and move it one way or the other. Now, like I was saying before, this material is 7/8 thick, right? So 1/8 more than 7/8 is 1 inch. So it's very easy for me to set this. I'm just going to push this in, slide this up to 1 inch, and let that set in place. Now I know when I drop this, or I pull the trigger and set this, or try to depress the trigger, it'll allow for me to move the machine forward when it drops down 1 inch, and that's the stop. Okay? So let me show you how this works. I take this, I have to pull the trigger, okay? I have to push up on this handle, and then it'll let me drop it, and if I pull the trigger, it'll depress and start the machine up, okay? So that's how you go ahead and depress the trigger. Now, here's the nice thing about the track saws, and this one in particular. You have this track right here, it has a groove in it, all right? And then, move it out of the way. We have to have our track here. So this piece of equipment will ride along this track right here. All right, so what I want to do is I want to set up and grab my combination square. This side of the piece of material has been jointed, so it's straight. I take this, bring this up. I want to take off the least amount of material as possible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this nice and tight. And I made a couple lines here to darken it up. Now, with this track, this is kind of nice, is this edge right here is a zero clearance from the blade. The blade will ride right along this edge. So if I put this edge right onto my line, it's going to cut perfectly straight. So I'm going to move my piece of equipment out of the way. Near the center of the bench. I'm going to pull my material up so that way I do not cut into